There is a global lookout notice for this man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, often seen in photographs with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's been dubbed Putin's chef. His company proudly hosts most of the Kremlin's official events and caters for them. Back in 2018, a US federal court had issued an arrest warrant for Prigozhin for widespread meddling in the American election of 2016. That election saw the rise of Donald Trump. The FBI has put Prigozhin on its most wanted list. They even have offered a bounty of $250,000 for his head. Prigozhin is in the spotlight once again as his private military contracting company, or PMC, known as the Wagner Group, has been accused of joining the fight against Ukraine in Donbass. But it's not just from the Russian side. Recently, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry had also proudly claimed that more than 20,000 foreign fighters from 50 different countries around the world had applied to join the International Legion of the Territorial Defense of Ukraine. They reportedly included Americans, Canadians, and several Europeans. Who are these foreign fighters? Why are they rushing tens of thousands of miles away to join the war, either with Russia or with Ukraine? What is their stake in a war that is happening so far away? If they get caught in the war, will they be treated as prisoners of war? Will the Geneva Convention apply to them? On Crux Decode, we'll shed a light on who these foreign fighters are and what their motivations are. The Wagner Group first came to light in the Central African Republic in 2014, the same year Russia annexed Crimea. Russia had been a long-time supporter of the president there, President Faustin Archange Touadera. The private military contractor was responsible for not just training the local troops of the CAR, but it was also at one point directly responsible for the safety and security of the president and his family. In return, Russia got multiple contracts for oil and gold and mining of other precious commodities. Ever since, Wagner fighters have shown their presence in wars ranging from Sudan to Syria. And now, Vladimir Putin wants to use them in eastern Ukraine. NATO had recently estimated that up to 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the military operation in Ukraine. Now, there is no independent way of confirming this, but if it is true, this would be the highest number of Russian military casualties since the war in Afghanistan. In that war, the Soviet Union had to retreat after almost a decade faced with a guerrilla battle against the Taliban. Because the Russian military operation in Ukraine has largely stalled in Kyiv as well as other big cities, it's now shifting its focus eastwards to the Donbass. Russia is more likely to use Wagner militiamen as opposed to their own regular army troops, thereby moving them away from places like Africa and Syria. Since Vladimir Putin launched his attack, both Ukraine and Russia have boasted of staggering number of foreign mercenaries willing to join the conflict. As I mentioned earlier, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry had revealed recently about how 20,000 people, foreigners, wanted to join the fight against Russia. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, in fact, says this is a sign that the entire world wants to sign up and join the side of David in this David versus Goliath fight. Days later, the Russian Defense Minister, not to be left behind, Sergei Shoigu, claimed that some 16,000 men, mostly from the Middle East, had applied to fight for Russia. Even Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the Russian government would have to meet foreign fighters halfway by allowing them to move into the combat zone. He said this in a meeting with his top military commanders. The infusion of outsiders and what can be called irregular forces could further complicate what is already a messy conflict. There's a whole bunch of actors on the Ukrainian battlefield. There are non-state actors, private military contractors, foreign fighters, volunteers, mercenaries, extremists, and of course terrorist groups. In war terminology, volunteers who join a rebel force or a militia, they are typically called foreign fighters. On the other hand, mercenaries are those who are generally employed by a state against another state or against non-state actors. The United Nations, for example, deemed the tens of thousands who joined ISIS in Syria and Iraq as foreign terrorist fighters. They were not called mercenaries by the UN. But such definitions can be tricky on the battlefield. They can also be easily contested. The Russian Defense Ministry, for example, has said that any foreigner caught fighting for Ukraine will be called a mercenary. They will not be eligible for protections as prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. At best, they can expect to be prosecuted just like ordinary criminals. So the looming question now at this juncture in this war is how or whether these foreign fighters and mercenaries will alter the course of the conflict itself. Now, many experts believe that the estimates by both Ukraine and Russia are high, more a wish list than reality. By the middle of March, hundreds of foreigners had showed up to fight for Ukraine, not thousands or tens of thousands. Over time, foreign fighters have the potential to be force multipliers. They may not be able to change the very nature of the conflict itself, but it may be different in the case of former special services personnel. Now, recently, Russia had said that it's investigating whether sabotage experts from the United Kingdom's Special Air Services, or the SAS, had been deployed to western Ukraine. Russia's top state investigative body had said last week that it was looking into a Russian media report alleging that SAS had been sent to Lviv, which is in western Ukraine. And Lviv, mind you, since this war began, has largely been peaceful. Russia's RIA Novosti news agency quoted a Russian security source as saying that about 20 members of this SAS, which is an elite military force that's trained to conduct special operations, surveillance, and counterterrorism operations, are right now operating in Ukraine. But most of these foreign fighters serve simply as cannon fodder because they end up causing more harm than they're worth. They have a lack of experience, they're not entirely attuned to what are the battlefield requirements, and because they're essentially war tourists, they're probably going there for a selfie and for an Insta story. Some have complained about weapons shortages. The language barrier has been a problem that's hindered whatever integration is possible with the Ukrainian forces, the regular Ukrainian troops on the front lines. The Ukrainians have also tried to discourage volunteers who do not have a military experience. In fact, the US State Department has warned Americans not to travel to Ukraine because they face the very real risk of capture or even death. Under the Russian constitution, for example, the use of private military companies is technically illegal. The Kremlin denies the Wagner Group ever exists. Prigozhin, for example, has also denied his ties to the Wagner Group. Vladimir Putin had reportedly made mercenaries part of Moscow's military strategy since it first intervened to seize Crimea in 2014. The Wagner Group was created to aid and to stand in for, and most importantly, provide plausible deniability to the Russian forces. And that is the singular purpose, more than anything else, that these organizations serve: to deny knowledge or responsibility for what would have otherwise been called a war crime.